So X-Men is in kind of a weird place right now. As most of you know, Disney bought Fox, meaning that we might see a reboot of the X-Men franchise later down the line in order to properly introduce them into the MCU. This doesn't negate the fact that we still have at least 4 more Fox X-Men movies scheduled through 2019. I honestly think that the Fox universe should have ended after Logan, since it would have been a solid final send-off for that world, and it just makes sense as it chronologically takes place the farthest in the future. Deadpool is the only exception here because of how perfect it is right now and how far removed it is from the other movies. Also, with Deadpool being Deadpool, you could easily use his signature fourth wall breaking jokes to justify his inclusion into the MCU without having to totally reboot his series. Disney has said that R-rated solo movies aren't off the table, so we're hopefully good if they ever want to make a pure Deadpool 3 after the Fox era is over. In the case of the other movies, I'm pretty skeptical. New Mutants was delayed a whole year because the studio said they didn't want 2 X-Men films to compete with each other during their theatrical runs. The problem with this explanation is that we've known about these release dates for so long that it doesn't really make sense for them to just realize this now. More sources have come out saying that the real reason was that New Mutants wasn't received as well as expected after test screenings. The delays were then made in an attempt to try to make the film scarier to capitalize on the success of recent horror films like It and Get Out. My hope is that the amount of studio interference doesn't lead to this becoming a more generic horror movie, and that it'll only prove how much more malleable the superhero genre can really be. I'm not as excited for the Dark Phoenix movie, however, mainly because of how the last movie turned out. X-Men Apocalypse, in my opinion, was just another assembly line superhero movie that introduced younger versions of old characters that weren't that compelling to begin with. So obviously following these uninteresting characters into the next movie as our leads doesn't sound like the best idea. However, the ending of Apocalypse gave us a look at more vibrant, comic-accurate costumes for the team, and Bryan Singer isn't directing this one, so there might actually be room for improvement. The Gambit movie I have no idea about, because it's been announced, delayed, and cancelled so many times that I feel like it just won't be good at this point. I don't get why they're making it if Disney's probably going to reboot the entire thing anyway. Some people have been theorizing that the reason New Mutants and Gambit have been pushed to 2019 is because they will be the start of a new X-Men series and that the delays have been made in order to add in connections to the MCU. This could be true, but I think that if Marvel were finally getting the X-Men back, they would want to use the characters we know to build more hype, rather than these more obscure ones that no one cares about as much. Nevertheless, whether it's Disney or Fox making these movies, the future X-Men films need to start implementing certain things in order to not continue to follow mistakes from the past. First off, they need to have more visually interesting action scenes. X-Men has always had cool moments where the mutants have used their powers for ordinary things like cooling a soda or something, but never the best action scenes. Logan really improved on this part, but it baffles me how someone could make the ending of Apocalypse with all these mutant characters so bland. In the end, everyone is just standing in a circle shooting projectiles at each other. I get that the older movies had limitations with less use of CGI, but these newer movies should really try to use the tech we have today to try to make these battles feel like they're coming from a comic book. Next thing, and this is the main one, focus on the team dynamic. People love the Avengers so much because it's fun to watch all these big personalities interact and clash. So by that logic, the franchise that is mainly based around the concept of a superhero team should also be able to have a colorful cast of characters that we all care about and want to see interact. The problem is that past X-Men movies have always played up certain mutants over others, and never really delved into the fact of them working as a team. They always just fought together in the end because they had to, because it's an X-Men movie and that's what the plot always has to lead to. Storm and Cyclops, for example, were boring one-note characters in the first trilogy, while Wolverine was given a lot more screen time and a more fleshed out backstory. Like, you can even see in this scene where Wolverine meets Storm and Cyclops for the first time, that they barely get an entrance and Storm isn't even facing the camera half the time. Apocalypse did a bit better with Cyclops' character, but Storm is once again just there for the big fight in the end and doesn't really add much value to the movie otherwise. Every movie also heavily focuses on the feud between Professor X and Magneto, which is an interesting thing to watch, but not for the 50th time. This is more of a kind of story issue, but it applies here too. Rather than the X-Men always being the pawns in Professor X and Magneto's chess game, have them be more substantial to the main plot, and put them in situations where they have to grow together in order to defeat whatever they have to overcome. This will lead to more personal moments between each mutant so that we can care more about the team as a whole. Days of Future Past introduced the character of Quicksilver, for example, who had an amazing scene and setup, but abruptly left in the middle of the film, where we were once again stuck following the same characters to the end that the franchise has conditioned us to care about more. Those training scenes in First Class and that scene where the characters all sat around and just talked is what I'm getting at here. We need more of that. Apocalypse almost did this with the younger mutants taking their trip to the mall, but apparently that entire subplot was cut from the film before the official release, so it doesn't count. Now, I know that X-Men 3 kinda sucked, but I always loved that Danger Room scene, because I feel like it gave us a little taste of what I'm talking about, since it's meant to show that the X-Men have been training between movies, and it's cool to see them combining their powers and communicating during battle for once. Director Simon Kinberg said that he's going to try to focus more on character with the Dark Phoenix movie, something he thinks Apocalypse lacked. This leaves me a little more optimistic, because I think X-Men is a great series and one that shouldn't turn into the next DCEU.
Class dismissed.
Hey, Colossus. Nice throw.
Simulation complete.